In this corner, we have Mario Kart 64, the fan-favorite installment of one of the most influential racing games ever made. In the other corner, it's Diddy Kong Racing, the unexpected new challenger that started its life as a Disney-themed real-time strategy game? Wait, that can't be right. Regardless of their beginnings, these two Nintendo 64 racing games were both released in 1997, leading to one of the greatest rivalries of all time. But what did the critics say 28 years ago? Was it as hotly contested as it is today? Or was there a clear winner in this 5th generation showdown? To answer those questions, I decided to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, N64 Magazine, Die Hard Game Fan, and more classic magazines that reviewed both of these racers back when they first came out. Today we're going to see where the critics landed and maybe, just maybe, settle this debate once and for all. Get those bananas ready because you're going to need them in this fast-paced episode of Magazine Matchup.
Fasten your seatbelts for a 360-degree burnout. Precision handling for 1 to 4 drivers. New Mario Kart 64. It really kicks asphalt.
Let's go ahead and kick things off with Electronic Gaming Monthly, who reviewed Mario Kart 64 in their 92nd issue. After giving the original Super NES game a surprisingly low score of 8.5 out of 10, EGM ended up liking the 64-bit sequel a lot more, going all the way up to a 9.25 out of 10. That was enough for Mario Kart 64 to earn a spot as the game of the month. Dan Chu ended up summing it up this way. Once in a while, a game comes along that's so much fun to play that you'll look past its problems. Mario Kart 64 fits that bill. What's wrong with the game? The power-ups are unbalanced and they help out the trailing players too much. But who cares? The game is a blast and takes over Super Bomberman as my favorite multiplayer game of all time. This game is several times better than the Super NES Classic, and that's saying a lot. This is a reason to buy an N64. Now, fast forward 9 issues, and it's time for Diddy Kong Racing to sit on the hot seat. Despite everybody enjoying the game, EGM gave Diddy a score of 9 out of 10, down slightly from Mario Kart 64. Dan does a really good job of explaining the conflicted consensus. If Diddy Kong Racing would have come out a year ago, it would almost certainly be my favorite N64 game. It's truly a work of art. This game beats Mario Kart 64 in every department. The gameplay is more balanced and requires more strategy. The levels are way more interesting. The adventure mode is a lot of fun. The only thing missing is more battle stages. 4 is just not enough. Diddy Kong Racing could have rated higher, had Mario Kart 64 not stolen most of its thunder. And with that, Mario Kart takes the early lead. But will it last? Well, let's find out. When it comes to GamePro, they didn't fool around with almost perfect scores. There were no half measures here. Instead, they went all the way and gave both games the highest score possible, a 5 out of 5. That's right, it's a tie. But don't worry, this is going to be the only tie that we talk about this episode. I guess we should start with Mario Kart 64, which they called a must-buy and a must-play. If you've experienced Super Mario Kart on the Super NES, this game will feel like a grand homecoming. New players of all skill levels will instantly pick up on the fun. Get ready, get set, get going with Mario Kart 64. Now, unlike EGM, GamePro did not dwell on the whole Mario Kart 64 comparison when reviewing Diddy Kong Racing. They instead gave it a 5 out of 5 and raved about all the things they loved about the game. Diddy Kong cruises past its holiday competition, offering extended value and fun gameplay variations, great multiplayer games, and cool courses. It's time to grab some friends and see who has the bananas big enough to speed into the spotlight of the most revved up racer this season. You see how they sidestepped the comparison there by only talking about this season? I see what you did there, GamePro. And I also see a point going to both Mario and Diddy. Now let's talk about a magazine that was not in love with Mario Kart 64. When Next Generation reviewed the racer in their 30th issue, they were not impressed. They gave it 3 stars out of 5 and complained that Mario Kart 64 isn't as bold or as deep as the first 16-bit venture. It's a good game, and while clearly a newly enhanced version, is nothing more than a great 16-bit game in 64-bit clothing. Now, when Next Generation got a hold of Diddy Kong Racing 7 months later, it was almost as if they saw the Mario Kart sequel that should have been in the first place. Nintendo and Rare's latest is one of those games that gives skeptics and cynics a good laugh. At first, Diddy Kong Racing takes the grossly popular Mario Kart racer, adds 2 new vehicles, and plants the game in a platform framework, giving it the appeal of an adventure. It's an interesting blend in elements, and even though both halves of the game are entirely derivative in nature, the combination works well. Tightly designed and well executed despite the cloying cuteness. In the end, Diddy Kong Racing is one that grows on you. And with that, we're all tied up, 2-2. Let's see if Next Generation's sister magazine can break this tie. For what it's worth, Edge was not as down on Mario Kart as their American counterpart Next Generation. Giving it a score of 8 out of 10, they liked the game, but they still had a few critiques. It would have been good to see more new power-ups rather than so many of the old ones return. The banana skins and green shells won't win many fans this time around, such as their weak nature in comparison to some of the other power-ups. Though the game is something of a missed opportunity at heart. Its multiplayer mode, addictive battle game, wonderful sound effects, and charming visuals will ensure it hits status. While they ended up liking Mario Kart, they loved Diddy Kong. Giving it a 9 out of 10, they felt that Diddy Kong was the kart racer to get in 1997. Admittedly, apart from the significant introduction of the adventure element into a racing title, there's little in Diddy Kong Racing that represents genuine originality. Yet, what it manages to achieve as a complete package is markedly better than what it imitates. And as such, one-player Diddy Kong Racing is everything Mario Kart 64 should have been. For once, Nintendo has been beaten at its own game. With Edge breaking the tie, we see Diddy Kong Racing take the lead for the very first time today. Can Mario Kart come back? Well, we'll see after this commercial break.
Mario Kart 64いよいよ登場。任天堂64でしか体験できない新しい迫力のバトルレース。2人、3人、4人対戦プレイなら超面白い。マリオカート64ツインカラーのコントローラーとセットで新発売。
So far today, we've looked at a lot of magazines that have covered the full spectrum of gaming. But what about the magazines that specialized in Nintendo content? Perhaps they sang a different tune. In the case of N64 Magazine, we get what is the closest matchup of the day. Giving Mario Kart 64 a score of 91%, they concluded that it doesn't have the advantage of originality, being an update of an existing game, so it's never going to create quite the same buzz as Super Mario Kart. And, annoyingly, it's not perfect in the way that Nintendo's own games usually are. And the PAL conversion is a typical Nintendo of Europe rush job and very disappointing. But nevertheless, I adore it. I've played it more than all the N64's other games put together. And 6 months after plugging it in for the first time, I still love it as much as ever. Now, when it came to Diddy Kong Racing, N64 Magazine gave it a score of 90%. That's just 1 point down from Mario Kart 64. Here's what ended up deciding the winner in this 64-bit matchup. Because Diddy Kong's power-ups run on a preordained system, there's absolutely no element of chance in races. The racer who makes the fewest mistakes wins. Sounds good in theory, but the world's most popular real-life games are great because of the role chance can play. The better life's randomness is reflected in your game, the more you'll enjoy it. In that respect, Diddy Kong Racing is just a tiny bit soulless. We like the random element in Mario Kart. You know what? That's a surprisingly cogent argument, and I'm honestly a little surprised that we haven't seen it brought up in more reviews. It also helps to tie things up again, with both games now having 3 points. Let's see if the next console-specific magazine can break that tie. Over at 64 Extreme, we saw the critics make largely the same points about Mario Kart 64. They gave the game a strong 93%, one of the highest scores of that year. I can't imagine any sane N64 owner not going out and buying this as soon as Nintendo deigns us poor souls in Europe worthy of its release. Since it arrived in the office, Mario Kart 64 has been the most played and most often borrowed of all the N64 games. I think that probably tells you more about Mario Kart 64 than I ever could. Despite its flaws, it is tremendous fun, and you'll be playing it for a long, long time to come. Now, as I mentioned, 93% is definitely a high score, one of the highest of the year. Of course, I use the qualifier one of because Diddy Kong Racing easily beat that score. That's right, Rare's racing game managed to earn a staggering 97%. It's true that Diddy Kong Racing has undoubtedly borrowed very heavily from Nintendo's Mario Kart 64. But, as is the case with Rare, the company has an amazing knack of taking an idea and crafting it into something beautiful. Diddy Kong Racing is a deep, colorful game with an overly kiddie feel and look. But after a few minutes, you'll be compelled with subtle details, blissful gameplay and graphics, and the full, rich world that makes Diddy Kong Racing a much better game than Mario Kart, and which deserves tremendous success when it's released. It has captured the heart of everybody here at 64 Extreme, and will do the same to all who come into contact with it because it's simply one of the finest games ever created. Wait, hang on. Did 64 Extreme call Mario Kart ugly? I don't know about that. Either way, Diddy Kong Racing is once again on top. Man, we have a real race on our hands. Sticking in the UK, let's go ahead and check in with computer and video games. Although they gave Mario Kart 64 a solid score of 4 out of 5, you could tell that something was wrong. Disappointing. That's the sole, most significant word that says so much about Mario Kart 64. Brilliant, eventually maybe, but initially and forever in the back of our minds, Mario Kart 64 is disappointing. There is a chance that Mario Kart 64 could become a classic in time, but the hit is far from instant. No custom victory tunes for each character or victory poses on the podium. The title screen is a static render as opposed to a cheeky Super NES drive-by. Mario Kart 64 is top quality, but it should have been perfect. Hey, you know what didn't disappoint CVG? That's right, it's Diddy Kong Racing, which received a perfect 5 out of 5. Diddy Kong really is what Mario Kart should have been. For a start, it's amazing looking. Elements of wave race are visible on the water stages, and the snow levels are amazing. But it's the playability that really makes this. The feeling you get is exactly like that from Super NES Mario Kart. Those who thought that Mario Kart was crap will find sanctuary in Donkey Kong Racing. Go and get it now, it's flippin' awesome. And with that, Diddy has taken a 2-point lead. At this point, Mario Kart's gonna need to use one of those blue shells if they hope to come back. We're gonna end things today with GameFan, the one magazine that never lets us down. As has been the case through a lot of the publications at the time, the editors at GameFan weren't fully sold on Nintendo's first Mario Kart sequel. Here's Chief Hambleton summing it up the way only he can. A very disappointing release, and the first shock for me. Is Miyamoto losing his magical touch? There's slowdown and a disturbing lack of textures in the multiplayer mode. Only 16 tracks and horror of horrors pop up? Sure, this plays a hugely addictive 2 or more player game, but in one player? No coins and over-speedy players, turning the game into a slinging match of who has the best weapons first. Until you discover the skid speed up, which makes the game even easier. There's no real evidence of 64-bit power here. This is essentially a souped-up version of MotorTune Grand Prix 2, but with less secrets. I'm starting to see 64-bit limitations here. While GameFan may have been disappointed by Mario Kart, the same was not the case for Diddy Kong Racing. They gave the game an average score of 95%, which may only be 3 points higher than Mario Kart 64, but the real difference is in the reviews. Once again, Chief Hambleton sums it up this way. After initial skepticism about essentially the same game as Mario Kart 64, I was prepared for a great game with inexcusably cute characters and hopefully some major gameplay improvements over the plumber's racing experience. I needn't have worried, as Diddy Kong Racing improves on every single part of the kart experience. Firstly, the graphics are the finest yet seen on any home system. There's much more tactical gameplay and oodles of replay value that you know to expect from Rare. Add to this some pretty intense multiplayer action, and you've got a game with near-perfect play mechanics. Now, if only the Mario characters were involved. And with that, Diddy Kong Racing takes first place. Although the race was initially back and forth early on, Diddy really opened up a lead there at the very end, giving us a final score of 6-3. That's a substantial win. Mario Kart 64 may be better remembered these days, but back in 1997, the critics definitely preferred Diddy Kong Racing. Did you see that coming?
This ain't just drag racing. This is Diddy Kong Racing. The rough riding, balloon grabbing, coin snatching, boss beating, rumble pack ready, racing adventure that's definitely off track. For 1 to 4 players, only on N64.
Hey, thanks for watching me break down these classic reviews. If you like these kind of magazine matchups, then let me draw your attention to the 7 other episodes we produced, including Turtles in Time versus the Hyperstone Heist, Super Mario World versus Sonic the Hedgehog, and even Ridge Racer versus Daytona USA. Now, here's the question I have for you. Which is better, Mario Kart 64 or Diddy Kong Racing? Look, I don't want to put my thumb on the scale here, but I agree with the critics. Diddy edges it out with the different vehicles and the adventure levels. Rare really did manage to outdo Nintendo. I'm honestly excited to see your thoughts in the comments below. In other news, I'm currently at the beach, but we should be back later this week with a new Review Crew episode. At least, I hope I had enough time to finish it before, I went to the beach. I guess you'll find out on Thursday. While you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.